She lived in a small town where the streets were quiet and the houses seemed to lean in on each other, as if sharing secrets. From the outside, it might have seemed like a simple life, but for her, every day carried a weight that no one could see. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they weren't poor either. They were somewhere in between, just managing to get by. Yet the real struggle wasn't about money. It was about feeling out of place in a world that never seemed to notice her. A world where her voice was quiet, her dreams invisible, and her heart often heavy with thoughts she didn't know how to share. At school, she was the kind of student who floated through the day without drawing attention to herself. She didn't sit with the popular kids, didn't join the loud groups, and didn't boast about anything she did. She was quiet, often watching and listening, absorbing the laughter, the arguments, the friendships that seemed effortless for everyone else. Her classmates sometimes mocked her silence, not realizing that behind her calm eyes was a storm of feelings. They didn't see the sleepless nights when she wrestled with worry, or the afternoons spent staring out the window, imagining a life far beyond the small town she knew. Home was not much easier. Her parents were not unkind, but they were busy. Her father worked long hours, leaving her mother to manage everything else. The house was full of the ordinary noise of daily life, yet she often felt alone, as if she were existing in a space between walls, not really part of what was happening around her. There were moments of warmth, her mother's gentle voice reading a story, her father's rare smile when he came home. But those moments were fleeting. Most of the time, the quiet in the house echoed her own feelings, small, unnoticed, and heavy with unspoken worries. Yet despite all this, she found a small refuge in music. She didn't know exactly when it started, but she discovered that she could express feelings she couldn't put into words. At first, it was just humming to herself in the corner of her room, tapping a rhythm on the edge of her desk, or moving her fingers across the smooth surface of a table as if it were a piano. She wrote down small melodies in a worn notebook, sometimes filling pages with notes she didn't know how to play but wanted to remember. Music became a place where she could be herself, a world where her feelings made sense, a place where the heaviness she carried could float out of her chest in notes and rhythms. School didn't make it easy for her to keep this world alive. Some teachers were kind and encouraging, noticing her quiet diligence and thoughtfulness. Others barely paid attention, focusing on students who shouted the loudest or got the highest grades. And then there were the students who didn't understand her at all. They whispered about her in the hallways, laughed when she walked by, and sometimes made cruel jokes she pretended not to hear. She learned to ignore them, to shrink into the corners where she felt safest, but the words still stung. The laughter, the mocking glances, the sense of being invisible, it all piled up inside her, a weight she didn't know how to release. Still, music was always there. One rainy afternoon when the clouds hung low and the streets outside were slick with water, she found herself alone in the school music room. It was a place she rarely went, a dusty room with old instruments and a faint smell of polish and paper. She had never played the piano before, but something about it called to her. She sat down on the bench, her small fingers hovering over the keys. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't even know if she could make a sound that mattered. But when her fingers pressed the first key, a soft note floated through the room and something inside her shifted. She played slowly at first, pressing keys at random, just to hear the sound. The notes were uneven, awkward, and sometimes sour, but they were hers. She closed her eyes and let her mind wander, imagining each note carrying away a piece of her sadness, each melody lifting some of the weight she had carried for so long. Hours passed, though she didn't notice. When the janitor finally knocked on the door, she looked up, surprised, and realized the sun had set, painting the room in shades of orange and pink. She didn't care about the time or about the mistakes she had made. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. After that day, she returned to the piano whenever she could. She found herself dreaming of the sounds she wanted to make, scribbling melodies in her notebook during classes she didn't enjoy, and tapping out rhythms on every flat surface she could find. Music became more than a hobby. It became a language she used to speak when words failed her, a companion in the loneliness, a way to process every emotion she couldn't explain. Her classmates still whispered, her teachers still overlooked her at times, but she felt a quiet strength growing inside. Each note she played was a small victory, a declaration that she existed, that her feelings mattered, that she had a voice even if no one else noticed it. She also began noticing the way music affected her surroundings. A single note could silence the chatter in the classroom. A simple rhythm could make her friends pause and listen, even for a moment. She realized that while people ignored her words, they couldn't ignore the emotion in the sound she created. Music had a power she hadn't known existed, a way to connect with people that didn't rely on conversation, on popularity, or on approval. It was raw, honest, and entirely hers. At home, her secret continued. She would play in the evenings when the house was quiet, letting the music fill every corner. Sometimes her mother would pause in the kitchen, listening with a soft smile, saying nothing. Sometimes her father would hum along absent-mindedly while reading the newspaper. They didn't know the depths of her feelings, but the music carried them anyway. It was as if the notes themselves were speaking the words she couldn't, telling a story only those who listened closely could understand. Despite the comfort music brought, she couldn't escape the world outside completely. There were days when the laughter and whispers at school felt unbearable. There were days when she thought about giving up, about pretending to be someone she was not, about hiding completely in the shadows. But every time those thoughts crept in, she returned to the piano and the music reminded her who she was. It reminded her that even in the quietest, loneliest corners of her life, she had something powerful, something that could not be taken away, something that could transform pain into beauty, fear into expression, and silence into voice. She started to imagine the music differently. It wasn't just a way to escape her sadness. It was a way to understand it, to explore it, and maybe someday to share it with others. She began experimenting, trying different combinations of notes, listening to the way they blended or clashed, learning how tension and release could tell a story. Each practice session became a journey, a small adventure into a world where she was free, where her feelings were valid, and where her pain could become something beautiful. Her friends noticed small changes, though they didn't understand the depth of what was happening. They saw her smile a little more often, heard her hum as she walked through the hallways, and sometimes paused to listen when she tapped a melody on a desk. Some of the teasing continued, but it hurt less. The music had given her a shield, a way to protect herself, a way to rise above the small cruelties of the world. For the first time, she felt that her inner world, the one that had seemed heavy, dark, and lonely, was not a burden to hide but a gift to cultivate. And so, in the quiet corners of her small town, amid the whispered judgments and unnoticed efforts, she grew stronger. Not because the world had changed, but because she had found something inside herself that no one could take away. Music became her voice, her friend, her refuge, and her weapon. She began to understand that the pain she carried did not define her weakness. It defined her depth. Each note she played, each melody she discovered, was a small rebellion against the silence that had surrounded her. A declaration that she mattered, that her feelings mattered, and that beauty could be born from the most unexpected places. By the time the year ended, she had transformed in ways no one else could see but her. She walked with a quiet confidence, not loud or brash but steady. She spoke less, but when she did, her words carried weight, because they were accompanied by the music she had nurtured. And though no one yet understood the full power of what she had discovered, she knew that her journey had just begun. Pain had been her companion for years, but now she realized it could also be her teacher, guiding her towards something extraordinary, something that could touch hearts in ways she hadn't imagined. In the shadows of the small town, she was learning a secret that the rest of the world had not yet noticed. Pain could sound beautiful, sadness could be transformed, and even the quietest person could have a voice that echoes far beyond what anyone could see. After discovering the piano, she began to spend more and more time in the music room at school. At first, it was only when the hallways were empty and the janitor was busy elsewhere. She would slip in quietly, close the door behind her, and sit on the worn bench, letting her fingers hover over the keys. She didn't have lessons, she didn't have a teacher, and she didn't have anyone guiding her. All she had was curiosity and the hunger to turn the emotions she carried inside into something real. Her first attempts were simple. She would press one key at a time, listening to the sound, letting it linger in the quiet room. Then she started pressing 2 or 3 keys together, trying to find combinations that sounded right to her ear. She didn't know music theory, she didn't know scales or chords, but she had a natural sense of rhythm and feeling that guided her. Sometimes she would laugh quietly at a note that sounded funny, and sometimes she would stop mid-piece, overwhelmed by the sound of something that unexpectedly touched her heart. It didn't take long before she realized something remarkable. The music she created wasn't just noise, it had emotion. Even her clumsy early attempts seemed to carry the weight of what she felt inside. A single note could echo sadness, two notes together could speak of longing, and a small melody could convey a story she hadn't yet found the words to tell. She began to understand that music had a language all its own, a language that didn't require explanation, that could move people without a single spoken word. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the dusty windows of the music room, she played a simple tune she had been working on for hours. She had written it down in her notebook, a series of notes that seemed ordinary on paper but felt extraordinary under her fingers. She closed her eyes and let the music flow. Each note felt like a release, a way to let go of the frustration, the loneliness, and the sadness she carried. When she opened her eyes, she was surprised to see her music teacher standing in the doorway. The teacher had been listening silently for some time, unsure whether to interrupt. "You play beautifully," the teacher said softly, stepping inside. "Do you take lessons?" She shook her head, feeling a flush of embarrassment and pride at the same time. "No," she whispered, I just try to play what I feel." The teacher smiled, a warm, encouraging smile that she hadn't seen often in her life. "Then you have a gift," the teacher said. "You don't just play notes. You tell a story with them." Those words stayed with her long after the teacher left. For the first time, someone had recognized her talent, not just the technical skill, but the emotion behind it. It gave her confidence she had never known before, and it made her want to play even more.
She began coming to the music room every day after school.
Sometimes for hours, exploring the piano, experimenting with melodies and letting her feelings pour out. As she practiced, she began to notice that her music could reach beyond her own heart. She played for her family at home sometimes, and though her parents didn't fully understand what she was doing, they noticed the change in her. Her mother would pause her chores to listen, a quiet smile on her face. Her father would stop in the doorway, leaning on the frame as if trying to capture a fleeting moment of beauty. Even her younger siblings would gather nearby, mesmerized by the notes, forgetting their games for a while just to listen. At school, her classmates started to notice too. At first, it was subtle. Some would glance at the music room when she played, curious but not daring to enter. Others would whisper among themselves, surprised at how the quiet girl could produce sounds that felt so alive. Rumors began to spread, some were admiring, some were mocking, but she didn't mind. She wasn't playing for them. She was playing for herself, for the release it gave her, and for the quiet hope that one day someone might truly understand what she was feeling. She started to compose her own pieces. Each one was like a diary entry, a record of her emotions and experiences. One day she would write something full of sadness, the next day a melody that carried hope, and sometimes a tune that felt like anger or frustration. Each piece became a reflection of her inner world, a way to process what she couldn't say out loud. The piano became a companion that listened without judgment, a friend who could hold her emotions without ever growing tired. Her compositions grew in complexity as she practiced more. She experimented with different rhythms, different tempos, and different harmonies. She would play a melody over and over, adjusting a note here, changing a rhythm there until it sounded exactly like she imagined it. Sometimes she would sit back, exhausted but satisfied, feeling as if she had poured her entire soul into the piece. And sometimes she would cry because the music had touched her in ways words never could. One afternoon, she decided to play for the school's small music club. It wasn't a big audience, only a handful of students and a few teachers, but it felt like the perfect opportunity. She was nervous. Her hands shook slightly as she approached the piano, and she felt her heart pounding in her chest. But as soon as she pressed the first key, all her fear melted away. The music took over, carrying her beyond the walls of the room and into a place where only her emotions existed. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a teacher clapped softly, followed by another, and soon everyone joined in. She felt a flush of happiness and disbelief. People had listened. People had felt something. For the first time, she realized that her pain, her struggles, her quiet suffering could become something that others could connect with. She wasn't invisible anymore. Her music had given her a voice. Encouraged by this small success, she began to share her compositions more often. She didn't perform in front of large crowds yet, but she played in small gatherings at home, at school, and sometimes for neighbors who stopped by. Each time, she discovered that the notes she played could reach people in ways she hadn't expected. A neighbor would pause with tears in her eyes. A teacher would comment on the emotion in the music. Even her peers began to approach her, curious to hear what she would play next. Despite these small victories, she still faced challenges. Not everyone understood her, and not everyone appreciated her talent. Some students mocked her quietly, saying she was weird or strange for spending so much time with the piano. Others whispered that she was trying too hard or that she didn't belong in the spotlight. There were moments when she felt discouraged, moments when the loneliness crept back in, threatening to pull her under. But every time she returned to the piano, and it reminded her why she had started. Music was not just an escape. It was a way to make sense of her life, a way to transform pain into something meaningful. Her family noticed the change in her too. They saw how music brought her joy, how it gave her confidence, and how it helped her navigate the ups and downs of life. Her mother began encouraging her more, asking to hear new pieces she had written. Her father, who rarely showed emotion, would nod in quiet approval. They didn't always understand the depth of her feelings, but they supported her, giving her the space to explore her talent. She also began to see herself differently. Where once she had felt small and unnoticed, she now felt a quiet strength growing inside her. She realized that the struggles she had faced were not weaknesses. They were experiences that had shaped her, experiences that gave her music its depth and authenticity. Each note she played was not just a sound. It was a reflection of her journey, a testament to the resilience she had built over the years. By the end of the year, she had created dozens of original pieces. She had spent countless hours practicing, experimenting, and composing. She had faced doubt, fear, and loneliness, but she had also discovered joy, freedom, and a sense of purpose. Music had become more than a hobby. It had become her language, her identity, and her gift to the world. She had learned that even in pain, there could be beauty, and that even the quietest person could make a profound impact if they dared to express themselves. Her journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more doubts, and more moments of fear. But she had learned the power of music, the power of emotion, and the power of believing in herself. And in the quiet moments when she sat at the piano, lost in the flow of melody, she knew that her life was beginning to change in ways she had only dreamed of. The small town around her had not yet realized it, but she had found something extraordinary, something that could touch hearts, change minds, and turn pain into something that sounded beautiful. Word of her talent began to spread, quietly at first and then more noticeably. It wasn't the kind of fame that came with lights and cameras. It was something subtler, more profound. People started to recognize her not just as the quiet girl in school, but as someone who could create music that made hearts stop for a moment. Teachers mentioned her in passing. Students paused in the hallways when they heard her playing, and even strangers who passed the music room occasionally stopped to listen through the slightly open door. Her first real taste of recognition came when the school organized a small music showcase. Participation was optional, and she almost didn't sign up. Standing in front of an audience made her stomach twist, and doubt crept in quickly. She thought about all the times people had laughed at her, ignored her, or whispered about her behind her back. What if they laughed at her again? What if the music she loved so dearly sounded foolish in front of everyone? But then she remembered the feeling she got when she played alone, the way the notes could lift her spirit, the way music could carry her pain into something beautiful. She decided she couldn't let fear stop her from sharing that. The day of the showcase arrived, and she waited backstage, her fingers tapping nervously against the piano keys in her mind. The room was filled with students, teachers, and a few parents, all chattering quietly, unaware of the storm of emotions she carried inside. When her name was called, she felt her heart race. She walked to the piano, each step heavier than the last, feeling like all eyes were on her, even though some weren't paying attention at all. She sat on the bench, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. The first note rang out, soft and deliberate. Immediately, the room grew quiet. She played slowly at first, letting the melody unfold naturally. Each note carried a story, a whisper of loneliness, a sigh of longing, a flicker of hope. As she continued, she lost herself in the music, forgetting the audience, forgetting the fear, forgetting everything except the melody that seemed to pour from her soul. The more she played, the more confident she felt. The music was no longer something she was making. It was something that was making itself through her. Something bigger than her, something alive. When the last note faded, there was silence for a brief, heavy moment. Then the applause started softly, growing louder until it filled the entire room. Some students wiped tears from their eyes. Teachers nodded, impressed and moved. Even parents leaned forward, captivated by the depth and emotion of the performance. She felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief, a kind of joy she had never known before. People had listened. People had truly listened. And in that moment, she realized that the world could feel what she felt, that her music could reach beyond her own heart and touch others. After that day, more people began to approach her, not with teasing or judgment, but with curiosity and admiration. Students who had once ignored her now asked her to play for them during breaks. Teachers encouraged her to perform at school events. Even people she didn't know visiting the school for conferences or meetings asked to hear her play. It was a slow change, subtle but undeniable. She was no longer just the quiet girl in the corner. She was someone who could evoke emotion, someone who could make others feel the depth of life in a way that words could not. With this recognition came new challenges. Some people envied her, quietly or openly. There were whispers of favoritism, suggestions that she spent too much time in the music room, and questions about why she was being encouraged more than others. For a while, these whispers made her hesitate. She wondered if she deserved the attention, if she was doing something wrong by sharing her gift. But then she remembered the feeling of playing alone, the way music allowed her to release what she carried inside, and she realized that her purpose was not to please others. It was to express herself, to let her pain and joy take shape and sound. She continued to practice relentlessly, determined to refine her skill and deepen the emotion in her music. She began exploring more complex compositions, challenging herself with pieces she had never attempted before. Some days were frustrating. Her fingers would stumble. The notes wouldn't sound right, and she would feel the weight of doubt creeping in. But she persisted, because she had discovered something far more important than perfection. She had discovered that music was a bridge. It could connect people, share her story, and give meaning to experiences that had once seemed invisible. Her personal growth mirrored her musical growth. She began to notice subtle changes in herself. Where once she had doubted her worth, she now held a quiet confidence. She walked with a little more steadiness, spoke a little more clearly, and even smiled more often. People noticed the change in her demeanor, though they didn't always understand the reason behind it. She wasn't seeking attention or praise. She was simply embracing the part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. Music had given her courage, and with courage came a new sense of freedom. Her family continued to support her quietly. They saw the difference in her, the way her eyes lit up when she played, the way her hands moved with intention, and the way she seemed to carry herself with a new kind of grace. Her mother sometimes asked her to play at family gatherings, and her father would make an effort to be present when she performed, leaning on the doorway with pride in his eyes. They didn't fully understand the depth of her emotions or the technical aspects of her music, but they recognized that it was transforming her life. They realized that their quiet daughter had found something extraordinary, something that gave her strength and purpose. At school, she was invited to collaborate with other students in the music club. This was a new experience for her, as she had mostly worked alone until now. She was hesitant at first. Sharing her music with others was a different kind of vulnerability. But she quickly discovered that collaboration brought new inspiration. Playing alongside others, listening to their interpretations and blending her melodies with theirs taught her new ways to express herself. It also gave her confidence that her music could resonate in many forms, not just in solo performances. As her compositions became more recognized, she began experimenting with emotion in new ways. She wrote pieces meant to evoke joy, pieces meant to evoke reflection, and even pieces meant to convey anger or frustration. Each composition was a journey, a way to explore the vast spectrum of human feeling. She found that the act of creating music was also an act of understanding herself. The melodies became mirrors of her soul, revealing aspects of herself she hadn't noticed before. Music was no longer just an escape. It was a guide, a teacher, and a companion. People began to seek her out outside of school as well. Neighbors, friends, and acquaintances asked her to play for small gatherings, community events, or even just casual visits. Some came with no knowledge of music, drawn simply by curiosity, and were moved to tears by the emotion in her playing. Others came with technical knowledge, amazed at the depth of feeling she could convey through simple melodies. Each performance reinforced a truth she had always known. Music had the power to connect people in a way that nothing else could. Even with all this recognition, she remained humble. She never played for attention, never performed to impress, and never allowed pride to overshadow her purpose. Her goal was always the same: to express, to release, and to connect. She understood that her talent was a gift, and she felt a responsibility to use it meaningfully. She continued to compose tirelessly, often staying up late into the night exploring new sounds, new rhythms, and new ways to evoke emotion. The piano had become an extension of herself, a way to navigate the complexities of life and transform them into something beautiful. Through these experiences, she also began to notice how her music affected others. Teachers would tell her about students who had been inspired by her to try new things. Parents would share stories of children who had found comfort or joy in her performances. Even peers who had once been indifferent or skeptical began to approach her with curiosity and admiration. She realized that her music was more than her personal expression. It was a bridge to others, a shared experience that could touch hearts and change perspectives. Her growth was gradual but steady. Each performance, each composition, each collaboration added layers to her confidence, skill, and understanding. She still faced challenges, moments of self-doubt, occasional criticism, and the lingering fear of not being enough, but she had learned to use those challenges as fuel. The piano had taught her resilience, patience, and the value of persistence. Every mistake, every misplayed note, every moment of uncertainty became part of the journey, part of the story she was telling through her music. By the end of this period, she had transformed in ways that were visible and invisible. She moved with a quiet assurance, spoke with a calm confidence, and carried herself with a sense of purpose. People still saw her as the quiet girl, but they also saw something more: a presence, a depth, and a talent that demanded attention. She had begun to understand that recognition was not about fame or applause. It was about being seen for who she truly was, for the emotions she could express, and for the gift she had nurtured in secret for so long. And in all of this, she never lost sight of why she started. The piano remained her sanctuary, her companion, and her teacher. It was where she could confront her emotions, explore her creativity, and connect with others without words. She understood that pain and struggle had shaped her, but she had learned to transform them into something that could be shared, something that could touch lives, and something that could bring meaning to experiences that might otherwise have been hidden or ignored. Her story was still unfolding, and she knew that greater challenges lay ahead. But she had discovered something that could never be taken from her: the power of music to express, to heal, and to connect. And she was ready to embrace whatever came next, confident that her talent, her courage, and her heart could carry her forward one note at a time. As time went on, she began to understand that music was more than just a way to express herself. It was a tool for courage, a way to confront feelings she had carried quietly for years. Each composition became a reflection of a part of her life that she had been afraid to face. Some pieces carried sorrow, remembering moments when she had felt invisible or rejected. Others carried frustration like storms of sound that allowed her to release anger without hurting anyone. And some pieces carried hope, delicate and bright, as if the notes themselves could carry her forward. Her courage grew slowly but surely. Performing in front of small groups had given her confidence, but she wanted to challenge herself further. She began practicing for larger audiences, imagining the room filled with people who had never heard her music before. The thought made her nervous, but it also made her determined. She realized that the more she allowed herself to be vulnerable, the more powerful her music became. It was no longer just a private escape. It had the potential to touch lives, to inspire, and to communicate emotions that words often failed to capture. One afternoon, she was invited to play at a regional music event for students. It was a significant step up from the school showcases she had done before. The hall was large, with rows of seats stretching farther than she could see. The stage was bright with lights, and the hum of the audience created a mixture of excitement and fear in her chest. For a moment, she thought about turning away, about retreating into the comfort of the music room she had always known. But then she remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, the emotions she had poured into her compositions, and the joy she had found in playing for others, she decided to go forward, step onto the stage, and let her music speak for her. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the room seemed to change. The bright lights, the large audience, the intimidating stage, all of it disappeared as she became lost in the music. She let herself play freely, letting her emotions flow through each note. The audience was silent, captivated by the depth and honesty of her performance. Some eyes glistened with tears. Some mouths opened slightly as if they could not believe the beauty they were hearing. And she felt something she had never felt before. A deep connection with strangers through the simple, honest language of music. That performance marked a turning point. She realized that the vulnerability she had once feared could be her greatest strength. By confronting her emotions through music, she was no longer hiding from pain. She was transforming it into something meaningful. Each performance became a journey, not just for her, but for everyone who listened. People could feel what she felt, understand her without words, and even find a piece of their own stories reflected in her melodies. She had discovered that pain could create beauty, and that beauty could create empathy. Encouraged by this realization, she began composing even more deliberately. She explored themes she had avoided before: loss, uncertainty, disappointment, and the quiet moments of fear that had accompanied her throughout her life. She also embraced the lighter side of emotion, composing pieces full of hope, warmth, and small joys. Every composition was a conversation with herself, a way to process experiences and a chance to connect with others on a deeper level. She found that the act of creating music helped her understand her own emotions in ways she had never imagined. Her growing skill and emotional depth did not go unnoticed. Teachers recommended her for special music programs, and she was invited to collaborate with musicians from other schools. At first, she hesitated. Performing with others was different, unpredictable, and sometimes intimidating. But she soon discovered that collaboration enriched her music in ways she could not achieve alone. She learned to listen to others, to adapt, and to harmonize her own voice with theirs. Together, they created pieces that were larger, richer, and more complex than anything she had done solo. She realized that sharing her music with others did not diminish her voice. It amplified it. At home, music had changed the atmosphere too. Her family, once unaware of the depth of her talent, now watched with admiration. Her mother often paused her daily chores just to listen, while her father would stand quietly in the doorway nodding with pride. Even her younger siblings, who had once been indifferent, began to imitate her melodies and tap rhythms along with her. Music had become a bridge between them, a way to connect without words, and a reminder of the beauty that could be created from dedication, practice, and emotional honesty. Despite these achievements, she faced moments of self-doubt. She questioned whether she was good enough, whether her music was truly meaningful, and whether people would continue to connect with it. These doubts were natural, she realized, part of the process of growing as an artist and as a person. Whenever she felt unsure, she returned to the piano, letting the music guide her. The more she played, the more she understood that perfection was not the goal. Emotion, honesty, and connection were what mattered. Every note carried a piece of her heart, and that was enough. Her confidence also allowed her to explore new styles and techniques. She experimented with tempo, dynamics, and rhythm in ways that surprised even herself. Some pieces were bold and dramatic, full of sudden changes that mirrored the unpredictability of life. Others were gentle and flowing, evoking quiet reflection. She began to see music not just as expression, but as storytelling. Each composition could convey a narrative, capturing experiences, emotions, and moments in a way that words could not. Her music became a diary, a collection of emotions, memories, and insights that she could share with the world. She also began to notice the impact her music had on others. Friends would approach her after a performance, describing how a particular melody had made them feel understood or comforted. Teachers would comment on the depth and emotion of her playing, sometimes asking how she could convey such feelings through the keys alone. Even strangers who attended recitals or concerts would share stories of how her music had moved them, helped them remember something from their past, or simply brought them peace. She realized that her pain, once hidden and isolating, had become a way to connect with the hearts of others. Her journey was not without challenges. Some people still judged her for spending so much time on music, calling her obsessed or saying she should focus on practical things. Sometimes she encountered criticism from those who didn't understand her style or approach. These moments were difficult, but she learned to take them in stride. She remembered why she played, why she composed, and why music mattered more than approval or recognition. The piano had taught her resilience and perspective, and she refused to let criticism deter her from expressing her truth. The more she performed, the more she understood that music could serve a purpose beyond personal expression. She began to think about how her compositions could inspire others, bring comfort to those who were struggling, and even encourage people to pursue their own passions. She realized that her talent was not only a gift but also a responsibility. Sharing it meant creating moments of connection, beauty, and understanding, and she took that responsibility seriously. Every performance, every note, became a chance to make someone feel seen, heard, or understood. At school, she became a quiet source of inspiration for her peers. Students who had been struggling with confidence, fear, or self-expression began to see her as proof that dedication, honesty, and courage could lead to extraordinary things. She didn't actively try to teach or guide others, but her presence and her music spoke volumes. She showed that talent was not just about skill, but about heart, persistence, and the willingness to face one's fears. Her story encouraged others to find their own voices, whatever form that might take. Over time, her music matured. The compositions she created were no longer just reflections of personal emotion. They were carefully crafted works of art. She began recording some pieces, experimenting with layering and harmonies, and even sharing them with a small online audience. The response was heartening. People wrote to her about how her music had helped them through difficult times, inspired them to pursue creative projects, or simply made their day brighter. She realized that the impact of music could extend far beyond the room she played in. It could reach hearts across distances, cultures, and experiences. Through all of this, she never lost her humility. She understood that her talent was a gift, one that required care, discipline, and respect. She continued to practice daily, refine her skills, and explore new ideas. She also continued to confront her own emotions, using music as a mirror to reflect, understand, and process her experiences. Every performance, whether in front of a crowd or in the quiet of her own room, was an opportunity to grow, to heal, and to connect. By now, she had come to embrace a simple but powerful truth. Pain could be transformed into beauty, and beauty could be shared to touch the lives of others. What had once been a source of loneliness, fear, and struggle had become a bridge, linking her to her family, her peers, her teachers, and even strangers who had never met her. She understood that her music was not just for herself, it was for everyone who needed to feel, to remember, or to be inspired. She had discovered the incredible power of turning personal struggle into shared experience. And though she still faced challenges, doubts, and moments of fear, she now had a foundation stronger than any obstacle. The piano, her constant companion, remained her refuge and her guide. It had taught her resilience, patience, empathy, and courage. It had shown her how to confront the depths of her emotions and transform them into something tangible, meaningful, and beautiful. And she knew that no matter where her life went from here, music would always be her voice, her expression, and her connection to the world. She had learned that the world might not always understand, that some people might judge, and that recognition could be slow. But the true measure of her talent was not applause, awards, or approval. It was the ability to touch hearts, to evoke emotion, and to transform her own pain into something that others could feel and carry with them. She had discovered the extraordinary truth that what had once been her greatest weakness, her sensitivity, her loneliness, her quiet suffering, was now the very thing that made her music unforgettable. And in this understanding, she found peace, purpose, and a growing excitement for the future. She knew there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, and more times when fear tried to hold her back. But she also knew that her music was stronger than any obstacle, that her heart could guide her through, and that every note she played was a testament to courage, growth, and the quiet power of turning pain into something profoundly beautiful. By the time she reached the final stage of her journey, she had grown into someone completely different from the quiet, timid girl who had once hidden in corners. She was still gentle, still thoughtful, but she carried herself with a calm confidence that came from years of confronting her fears, embracing her emotions, and trusting in her own voice. Her music had transformed her in ways that no one could fully see but everyone could feel. And now she was ready for the greatest challenge yet. sharing her music with the world beyond the school, beyond her small town, and beyond the people who had once doubted her. The opportunity came in the form of a regional music festival, a gathering of talented young musicians from across the area. It was the largest audience she had ever imagined, a hall filled with hundreds of people who had come to witness music at its finest. The thought of performing there made her nervous in ways she had never felt before. Her stomach twisted, her hands trembled slightly, and for a moment she wondered if she should turn away. But then she thought about everything she had learned, the hours spent practicing in the quiet of the music room, the courage gained from performing in front of smaller crowds, and the realization that music could transform pain into something beautiful. She knew she had to do it. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage, feeling the bright lights hit her face and the eyes of the audience fall upon her. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar mix of fear and excitement. Then she sat at the piano, her hands hovering over the keys for just a moment before beginning. The first note resonated through the hall, soft and tentative but filled with emotion. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her. Every melody, every chord, every subtle shift in tempo carried her story. The struggles, the loneliness, the triumphs, and the hope she had nurtured over the years. As she played, the audience became still, captivated by the depth and honesty of her performance. Some leaned forward in their seats, completely absorbed. Others had tears streaming down their faces, moved by the way the music spoke to something inside them that they had never been able to name. For the first time, she realized that her personal struggles, the pain and uncertainty she had carried in silence for so long, were now reaching out to touch the hearts of strangers. What had once been her secret burden had become a gift she could share with the world. By the time she finished, the hall was silent for a few heartbeats, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then slowly applause began to fill the room, soft at first, then growing louder and louder until it became a roar. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and shouting in admiration. She felt a rush of emotion unlike anything she had experienced before. She was overwhelmed not just by the applause, but by the realization that her music had connected with so many people, that the emotions she had transformed into sound had been understood, appreciated, and even loved. That performance marked the culmination of everything she had worked for. She had turned years of silence, fear, and struggle into something that could touch the lives of others. People who had once ignored her, laughed at her, or doubted her now stood in awe of her talent, not because she had sought their approval, but because she had stayed true to herself and allowed her emotions to flow freely through her music. It was a quiet triumph, one that no applause could fully capture, because it was about more than recognition. It was about the journey she had taken, the growth she had achieved, and the courage she had found within herself. After that day, opportunities began to open up in ways she had never imagined. Teachers recommended her for more performances, both in her region and beyond. Invitations arrived from music programs, community events, and even professional musicians who had heard of her talent. But she approached these opportunities with careful thought. She wanted to perform not for fame or approval, but to continue expressing her emotions and connecting with people in a meaningful way. She had learned that the true power of music lay not in accolades, but in the ability to move hearts, to comfort, and to inspire. Her compositions also began to reach wider audiences. She recorded some of her pieces and shared them online, initially for a small circle of listeners. The response was overwhelming. Messages arrived from people who had been touched, encouraged, or healed by her music. They shared stories of how her melodies had helped them through difficult times, inspired them to follow their own passions, or simply provided a moment of peace in a chaotic world. She realized that her music was no longer just her own. It had become something that belonged to everyone who listened and connected with it. Through all of this, she remained humble. She never played for attention, never sought recognition for its own sake, and never allowed pride to overshadow the reason she had started in the first place. Every note she played carried honesty, every melody held a piece of her heart, and every composition reflected the journey she had taken. She understood that the power of her music lay in its truth, in its ability to convey emotion and experience without pretense. It was raw, real, and deeply human, and that is what made it unforgettable. Her family watched her transformation with quiet pride. They had seen the shy, uncertain girl who once struggled to find her voice grow into a confident expressive young musician who could touch the hearts of strangers. Her mother often told her how proud she was, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Her father, who had always been reserved, began to express his pride more openly, sometimes offering encouragement with a simple nod or a smile. Even her siblings, who had once been indifferent, began to recognize her dedication and the beauty she created through her music. Music had become a bridge not just to strangers but to her family as well, a shared language that united them in admiration and love. She also began to notice something extraordinary. People who had once dismissed her or underestimated her now looked at her differently. Teachers who had overlooked her, classmates who had whispered behind her back, and even strangers who had once ignored her presence all paused when they heard her play. Some admitted quietly that they had misjudged her, that they had never understood the depth of feeling a quiet person could hold. She did not hold resentment. Instead, she felt gratitude that her dedication, persistence, and honesty had been enough to change perceptions, to reveal the strength and beauty that had always existed within her. As she continued to perform and compose, she began to think beyond her own experiences. She wanted to use her music to inspire others, to show that struggle, pain, and vulnerability were not weaknesses, but sources of strength and creativity. She began mentoring younger students, quietly encouraging them to find their own voice, whether through music, art, or any form of expression. She shared the lessons she had learned. That courage was not the absence of fear, that talent was not defined by approval, and that honesty and dedication could create something truly remarkable. Through her journey, she had discovered a profound truth. The very experiences that had once caused her the most pain were the same ones that gave her music its power. Loneliness had taught her empathy, struggles had taught her resilience, and quiet moments of fear had taught her courage. Every note she played, every melody she composed, was a testament to her ability to transform hardship into something beautiful, meaningful, and enduring. She realized that her story, like her music, could serve as an example to others that pain could be a source of strength, and that challenges could be transformed into gifts. Even as opportunities grew and recognition increased, she remained grounded. She continued to practice daily, not for applause but to explore the depths of her own emotions and to refine the language she had found in music. She experimented with new styles, compositions, and arrangements, always seeking ways to communicate more effectively, to reach hearts more deeply, and to create experiences that were unforgettable. Her dedication never waned because she understood that true artistry required patience, persistence, and honesty. The culmination of her journey was not a single performance or achievement, but the transformation of her life. She had grown from a quiet, overlooked girl into a confident, expressive musician, capable of touching hearts in profound ways. She had learned to face her fears, embrace her emotions, and channel them into something that inspired and connected with others. She had discovered that the world could hear her, that her pain could become beauty, and that her voice, once silent, could echo far beyond what she had ever imagined.